This video is brought to you by NVIDIA's RTX GPUs, powering technological leaps like full ray tracing supported by the all-new DLSS 3.5. Alan Wake 2 joins Cyberpunk 2077 as being one of the few games to sport all of this cutting-edge technology, so if you'd like to learn more about that, then stick around until the end of the video. The best thing I can say about Alan Wake 2 is that there is absolutely nothing like it. There's nothing else like Alan Wake 2. It is not constrained by genre. You cannot call it a straight-up survival horror title because to do so underplays and undersells the centrality of its utterly unique storytelling. You can't point to a single source of inspiration for it, literary, TV show, movie, game, or otherwise. Its muses are too disparate, from Twin Peaks to Resident Evil to The X-Files to rock opera. You can't even liken its composition to anything else. Unlike anything else I've experienced, it fuses gameplay, in-engine cutscenes, live-action sequences, as well as sequences that blend all of these things together. Most importantly, this has Remedy's unmistakable fingerprints all over it, except they're no longer fingerprints or brushstrokes or flourishes or any other idiom relating to subtlety. No, there's nothing subtle about this. This is the most Remedy thing that Remedy have ever remedied out the door, and it speaks to a confidence that they have arrived at, steeped in not only their own unique approach as game makers and storytellers, but also in the history of their studio, the various games that have preceded this, and the way these games are now being joined together as part of Remedy's connected world. I feel like ever since Max Payne, Remedy has kind of wandered. They've made some great games since then, absolutely, but it's always felt like they've been reaching for the game that would throw wide the gates, welcoming the masses into their weird world. Control was certainly an important step in that journey. This SCP-inspired world of paranormal objects and events was the perfect playground for how Remedy liked to tell stories, and the thick action and impressive technology of that game made it more accessible than anything Remedy had done since Max Payne. But even then, I feel like Control was still holding back a little. It was, first and foremost, an action shooter, and it had all this weird stuff in there, but most of that felt at arm's length. Like the literal holding cells within the oldest house, so much of what made Control interesting was locked behind protective glass. You could see it, but you couldn't ever get close to it. Fascinatingly, Alan Wake 2 is a perfect inversion of this. It steps back from the action, and it just embraces the weirdness with a big old bear hug. Remedy was made to make survival horror games, a genre that finally balances storytelling, exploration, and action. It is the first time that Remedy have made a survival horror title, but right out of the gate, they have made one of the best survival horror games ever made, absolutely nailing things like combat, puzzle solving, world design, resource economy, and boss encounters. But the genre choice is just a small part of what this experience really is. The bulk of it is this story, this fourth wall breaking meta story that folds in on itself on so many different axes. A playful jaunt through different film and literary traditions, a celebration of tropes while also an inversion of them, a journey through Remedy's entire catalogue of games without ever explicitly naming a single one of them. Alan Wake has the presentation, action, and stylings of a AAA blockbuster, but the esoteric sensibilities of an art house film, or more appropriately, theatre, because that's what so much of this feels like. Theatre. It's a little bit raw, a little bit ratty and imperfect at times, but always really human. Like, you are aware of the human beings on stage as they play their roles here, and not just because of the live action thing. You are aware of the human beings who wrote and directed this, and not only because they star in the actual game, but also because there is no way that anyone but this group of people could have made this.
Nightingale goes missing for 13 years.
I use my writing to project myself out of this room, like a deep-sea diver to go deeper and explore the depths of this prison for a way out.
Alright, I know it's not particularly fun, but I do think we should talk about bugs, technical polish, and performance, because there are some important callouts here, some of which definitely impacted the overall quality of my playthrough. So I'll tell you right off the top that Alan Wake 2 is at least a little bit buggy, or it was for me when I completed my playthrough. That was prior to a day one patch being deployed, but I don't know exactly what that patch fixed, as I haven't been able to test it, so I can only speak from my own personal experience. Bugs in Alan Wake 2 range from minor inconveniences to progression blocking dead ends. On the minor end of the spectrum, I did notice some visual glitches associated with enemy ammo drops. There would just be these sort of brown cubes as opposed to actual ammo packs or whatever. There were also some textures which were a bit slow to load in. Minor things, they happen infrequently, they really don't matter all that much. Moving up the spectrum, there were a number of things that required a restart. Sometimes when you return from the mine place, that camera will get stuck and the game becomes unplayable, necessitating a game restart. In one instance, I had a box move during a combat encounter because an enemy hit it with a hammer, and that box then blocked the door, meaning I needed to reload the checkpoint. There were also quite a few instances of things that should have been clickable, but the UI just bugged out and I couldn't click on them. I had to completely skip one side activity puzzle because of this. So they kind of suck, but they don't suck as much as this one bug that essentially totally broke the game to the point where Remedy had to send out new save files to reviewers so they could continue their playthroughs. I don't have footage of this as it was a late game and I'm not allowed to show it, but basically something that should have triggered a cutscene didn't, and until you saw that cutscene, you couldn't progress. Remedy have said that the issue has been fixed in this day one patch, but again, I can't test that. So yeah, Alan Wake 2 is a little buggy, but I think the bottom line question with this stuff is, should I wait to purchase, or is it a safe purchase right now? Look, assuming those progression blocking bugs are indeed fixed, I think this game is so good that it's worth putting up with this little bit of jank to experience it. You'll of course benefit from waiting a little longer, but if you're excited about this, I wouldn't let these bugs stop you from jumping in, again, so long as that progression stuff is fixed. That brings us to performance. Now this was an area that made everyone a little nervous since the minimum specs for this on PC were huge. Remedy said that to be able to play this game at 60 FPS, medium settings, 1080p, ray tracing off, you would need an RTX 3070, and you'd still need to set DLSS to performance, meaning the game is being rendered at a native 540p and then upscaled. Thing is, these minimum specs are a very rare occurrence of a developer under-promising and over-delivering, because even on my 2080 Ti Ryzen 3700X machine, I was able to comfortably clear that 60 FPS at 1440p. Just in case you think I'm bullshitting you, Digital Foundry echo that sentiment, with their PC guy Alex Battaglia confirming that he was getting 83 FPS on the recommended RTX 3070 when playing at 1440p. Finally, you can hear it from Remedy themselves. Their head of comms tweeted out today saying that they played it very safe with those recommended specs. Quote, under promise, over deliver, or something finished like that, end quote. Bottom line is that if you have a PC at or near the minimum specs, you will be able to play this game very comfortably. Hell, you can even play it on an HDD, which is something that I tested at one point. Load times are very long, and the game does fail to load at times, requiring you to reload your last checkpoint, but it does work, just. On the high end of the spectrum, running this game on an RTX 4090 and i9 13900K, this game runs absolutely flawlessly. With ultra settings, every form of ray tracing maxed out, you are still hitting like 80 plus frames natively rendered. You can then turn on DLSS to various levels to comfortably clear over 100 frames, and then you can turn on frame generation to get upwards of 130 FPS. It also has full ultra-wide support, though do note that the cutscenes are not ultra-wide, it will pan them into 16:9. All of this happens with no frame drops, no crashes, just a really watertight experience that only becomes more impressive when you start to consider just how good this game looks and how much new technology it's embracing.
We can't assume the person writing these pages isn't playing us.
I agree. But it's our best lead.
I had a light now. I needed to get back to the subway station entrance.
Alan Wake 2 is set in two very small, very dense, and stunningly detailed locations. The first is the Pacific Northwest, or more specifically, the town of Bright Falls and the nearby Watery. It's log cabins and diners with booths, and it's adjacent to waterways and greenery that would be beautiful if it weren't for the terrors they concealed. The other location is New York City, or at least a version of it. It's the starkest possible contrast to Bright Falls. There's nothing natural here. It is dark and dirty. The only light to be found are flickering street lamps or the gentle glow of neon signage. Both of these locations are visual and technological tours de force in their own right, displaying a surprising amount of range by leaning into the strength and conceit of each of these settings. For the Northwest, the natural environment feels authentic, organic, and dense. The town of Bright Falls has a similar authenticity that results in this understated beauty. It's not trying to be flash, nothing looks out of place, it all looks as simple and typical as one might reasonably expect from a town like this, but all of this has been so painstakingly detailed and so beautifully lit that it looks almost like a painting. The afternoon sun in particular really brings Bright Falls to life, with an orange glow warming the entire scene, the sun's reflection flickering in the ground puddles and window panes. New York is similarly striking, but in totally different ways. Here, lighting is used to make each part of the world look like its own installation at an exhibition. Monuments and buildings are all given form against the backdrop by way of illumination, and neon signage both lights the darkened alleyways while signaling a path forward. The ground clutter here really stands out. I don't think I've ever seen a game that has this much ground clutter without it looking like a soupy mess, but it really just sells how abandoned this rendition of New York is and how lonely Alan is within it. Both of these locations are themselves homage to different but related cinematic traditions. Bright Falls is very analogous to Twin Peaks. It's small and seemingly unremarkable, with its horrific secrets shrouded by the protective blanket of nature. To pass through its forest is to cross the threshold in the hero's journey, a point not unsubtly made by way of the chapters often being divided by the characters literally driving through the woods. New York, on the other hand, is classic film noir. Its steamy vents, its neon signs, its rain-slick streets, disused subway stations, and haunted Art Deco hotels and cinemas. It's the scene for a very different sort of detective tale, not the askew paranormality of Twin Peaks, but something more hard-boiled and horrific. The worn and weary-faced detectives of Chinatown or Blade Runner meets the horrific butchery of a slasher horror flick. These locations both tell their stories before the characters utter so much as a word. You know what you are going to get the moment you step into each of them, and with Remedy telegraphing things that way, it gives them so much license to really stretch their legs within these genres, having plenty of room to run wild without ever tripping over. Consistent with how I usually feel about world design, the small footprint and intimacy of these locations is one of their best features. There's only a handful of locations in Alan Wake 2, but you will return to most of them many times. They are small, sometimes tiny, but they are very dense. Stuff happens at each of these locations. There is a reason for you to be there, and then a reason for you to return at some point. When you do return, you remember these spaces. You walk through them without the aid of a map or a GPS marker. You come to know Bright Falls and New York. You have a relationship with this space rather than just moving through it, and it's in line with the intimacy that is the defining characteristic of the whole Alan Wake 2 experience. Just as you come to intimately know these characters in this story, you will also come to intimately know the stage on which it's set. Having said all of this, the world design still delivers in the way that a video game world should. It provides a reason to explore it, at first to complete your main objectives and then to comb for secrets, like additional manuscript pages that further flesh out the story, or more resources for use in combat, or for side activities. One recurring activity for Saga involves bringing nursery rhymes to life by finding little wooden figurines and placing them in these summoning circle things. I don't want to say any more so as not to spoil it, but it's very much in keeping with how Remedy approach things. Video game side content is often formulaic, and there's a little bit of that here in Alan Wake 2, but on the whole, Remedy have done their absolute best to spruce up that formula wherever they could, not with new mechanics, but with their own unique approach to storytelling, world building, presentation, and meta-narratives. There is one exception to this though, and it's the rewards economy that incentivizes a lot of this side content and exploration. By following clues and solving puzzles, Saga will find lunchboxes full of manuscript clippings, and Alan will find words of power scrolled on the wall. These can then be used to purchase various upgrades like faster weapon reloading, or a chance to stun enemies when you shoot them in the head twice, etc. To be honest, it's really shitty, and I think it kind of cheapens the game. Oddly enough, I said almost the exact same thing about the weapon upgrade system in Control, which was not only really bad on spec for a number of reasons, but it also just felt really out of place in a game that was more about vibes than it was about video gamey stuff. It feels even more out of place here in Alan Wake 2, to the point where I find it like almost offensive. Like, how dare you sully this artistic journey with this video game nonsense? Like, at no point was I ever watching Twin Peaks thinking to myself, oh, this show would be so much better if Agent Cooper could hold 8 bullets in his gun instead of 6. Yes, I'm aware that I'm comparing apples and albatrosses here, but it really does feel very dumb in this otherwise engrossing and seamless storytelling experience to be rewarded with the same things you might expect to find on a new Borderlands gun. It's not that these things are bad, it's just that they don't fit in this game. This is one part of the survival horror genre that Remedy absolutely did not need to carry into Alan Wake 2. I think this minor quibble amply demonstrates just how few and far between actual complaints about this world design are. When your biggest pain points are superfluous elements rather than bad elements, you've done something right. Bright Falls, Watery, and New York are as near to perfect as they needed to be. That's not to say that they are perfect by any objective metric, but they are perfect for this game, this studio, and this story that Remedy wanted to tell. They are each this brilliant canvas on which this peculiar paranormal saga of Saga and Alan unfolds, and I'll tell you right now, you have never experienced a story quite like the one in Alan Wake 2.
A broken transmission I couldn't quite make out.
But your name can still be made out underneath.
Alan Wake 2 is one story running along two parallel tracks. One of those tracks stars the game's namesake, Alan Wake, a tortured author who wrestles with a dark presence that corrupts his writing. The other track focuses on the story of Saga Anderson, a new character to the series. She's an FBI agent dispatched from HQ to investigate a mysterious murder. She's joined by her partner, Alex Casey, played by none other than Sam Lake himself, Sam Lake being one of the writers and directors of this game. A big question I know everyone has about this is, do you need to have played Alan Wake 1 in order to play Alan Wake 2? And the answer to that is absolutely not. This is a standalone story that you could enjoy without having seen a single frame of Alan Wake 1. However, there are callbacks that deepen your appreciation for what's on offer here if you have played the first game. If you're limited on time and cash, maybe just look up a supercut on YouTube or something, but if you're so inclined, then you can grab the Alan Wake remaster for PC and current gen consoles, as well as the original, which you can get pretty cheap on Steam. Whenever you choose to start playing Alan Wake 2, it will begin in the town of Bright Falls. Saga and her partner have been sent to investigate the freshly murdered body of an FBI agent who just turned up, even though he's been missing for 13 years. Making it even stranger, the murder is at least somewhat connected to the Cult of the Tree, a mysterious cult that's been sighted operating in and around Bright Falls. So that's the starting point for this story, and after that, it's really hard for me to talk about any specifics without spoiling things, so I'm not going to. But there are some things I'm going to talk about without spoiling anything that make this a really fascinating text. And I call it a text deliberately because I really believe that this is dense enough to warrant that sort of label, and layered enough that it invites the sort of interrogation that very few video games invite. There are multiple layers to this narrative, both functionally within the conceit of the storyline itself, but also in the way that the story is told. There are narrative techniques both employed and deconstructed here, particularly as it relates to Joseph Campbell's model of the hero's journey, which is a central theme to this game. There's this very compelling dance with genre tropes at work. In Kill Bill, Tarantino delivered painstaking homage to spaghetti westerns and Japanese cinema that highlighted their thematic consistencies while accentuating their stylistic differences. Remedy is doing exactly the same here. It's telling one story in two or more ways, paying homage to horror, film noir, psychological thrillers, and action as it does so. There's really fascinating cultural underpinnings here too. This game is made in Finland by a predominantly Finnish development team. They want to showcase their culture and worldview in this game, and they absolutely do that. The fictional town of Bright Falls was actually founded by Finnish immigrants. Many of the main characters in the game are Finnish and have Finnish accents, some of them very thick accents, and they will splice Finnish words into their English dialogue.
Hey, I can't seem to find my way out of here. Can you point me to the exit?
No totta helvetissä. Of course, Tom. The work will instruct its maker.
Saga is named Anderson, of Swedish ancestry. That opens a whole new cultural framework up, exploring the relationship between Sweden and Finland as neighbours, but also the whole Viking thing and their pantheon. A central thread running through this game is the Norse pantheon of gods. Again, I won't spoil how. Then we start getting to the whole story within a story thing. This is not a spoiler, by the way, but Alan Wake is a story about a man who can bring horrors to life through his writing. But that is being written by human beings at Remedy who are aware that through their writing they are bringing to life a horror story about a writer who is bringing to life a horror story through his writings. That is not something that you might discern after careful inspection. Rather, it's something that Remedy make you very, very aware of as you play. They want you to know that they know that this is both kind of funny and kind of ironic at the same time. And what better way to do that than to put one of the writers of the video game into the video game? Sam Lake is the co-writer and co-director of Alan Wake 2. He is also the face of Agent Alex Casey, Saga's partner. And he's also the face of Alex Casey, a fictional character cooked up by Alan Wake who happens to have the same name as the real Alex Casey. And while Alex Casey is faced by Sam Lake, he's voiced by James McCaffrey, who was the voice of Max Payne And Sam Lake was also the face of Max Payne back in the first 2 games. So Sam Lake is Max Payne, who is Alice Casey, who is written by Alan Wake, who is written by Sam Lake. Do you see now why this game is so fucking good? Name for me another developer that would try to pull something like this off. Okay, you probably said Kojima. Name anyone else but Kojima. See, you can't do it. Thank you. This neatly segues us into one of the most exciting aspects of Alan Wake 2, and that is the Remedy connected universe. Now, to this point, Remedy games have not been explicitly connected. They've had lots of shared touch points and nods, but they have been separate. Control, in particular the final DLC of Control, began building the framework for what we now call the Remedy connected universe, and Alan Wake 2 goes all in on this, making explicit that this connected universe exists and that Control was just the start of something much, much bigger. That immediately begs the question, do you need to have played Control in order to appreciate Alan Wake 2? And again, the answer is absolutely not. However, there are callbacks that you will notice and appreciate if you have played Control. The most important thing to understand about Control, though, is that it's the story of the Federal Bureau of Control, or the FBC, a government agency tasked with policing and containing paranormal phenomenon. For the purposes of Alan Wake 2, the particulars of Control don't really matter. What matters is the existence of the FBC and the existence of these paranormal phenomenon. Together, these things create a scaffolding, or better yet, one of those like IKEA grid shelves into which Remedy can shove new stories. Alan Wake 1 predated this shelf, but Control and now the Alan Wake franchise both sit neatly within it, and around it is a lot of space for Remedy to tell all sorts of weird, fucked up stories in this connected universe that they are now committed to building. You see it explicitly in the game's main story, callbacks to events in Control, references to other paranormal events elsewhere, hints at where all of these stories might go next. It's just so exciting to imagine Remedy fully embracing this sort of vision. It's almost like one of the world's best developers have just decided that they're going to start making a series of games based loosely on the X-Files or something. Maybe that's too old a reference for some of you, but for me that's like the coolest possible shit I could think of. The meta-narrative is a headfuck in the best possible way, the Remedy connected universe is exciting, and just to top all of this off, there's this utterly unique use of format at work here in Alan Wake 2. For a long time, they've been tinkering with their mix of live action sequences, in-game cutscenes, and real-time gameplay. Remedy have never got it this right before, and no other video game has ever got it close to this right before. The move from game engine to live action is a unique storytelling technique that alters our view of these characters. You think of them in their human representations first, and these characters all become more real for the fact that you can see their flesh and blood actors standing right there in front of you. It also enables these powerful visual motifs. For the Alan Wake sections in particular, Remedy overlay clips of Alex Casey / Sam Lake onto the scenery so you can see his iconic face, his silhouette, his pacing form as he interrogates his subjects. There's also something in the way that these live action sequences are shot in that they're a little bit B-grade. This is not slick Hollywood level production, it's a step down, but very intentionally. There's a lot of tight-in shots just showing people's actual faces and holding those shots for a long time. It's like the point of these sections is to show human beings, and that's exactly what the camera work does. As such, it feels like Remedy have trained a camera on a theatre production more than on a TV show or movie set. It feels more human, and it looks rougher for that, sure, but I love it all the more for that. I love it that it has this kind of art house feel. I really think it would have been far less interesting had it all the polish of an HBO level production. Finally, we need to talk about music. Music in Remedy games has always been important, but it's never been more important than it is here in Alan Wake 2. The game is broken up into episodes, and when each of these end, there's a unique song that plays, and that song will subtly evolve throughout your playthrough. There's a big through line relating to a band and how important their music is to them and their community and to Saga. There's also, without spoiling too much, one of the greatest sequences I have experienced in a video game. It relates to music. It's unbelievable. You thought the ashtray maze in Control was cool? You have seen absolutely nothing yet. It's rare for a video game to intellectually stimulate us. A lot of that is because storytelling formats used by most games are quite static, and certainly because 95% of most video game writing is not great. As someone who loves this art form, that is just a fact. It is rare to find a game where you might want to sit down and study it, to get inside the minds of the people who wrote it and try and understand what they read or watched or played or listened to that would lead them to create something like whatever it is you're playing. Alan Wake 2 does that. Through its narrative, its layering, its self-aware meta commentary, its subtle and explicit connections to Remedy's previous and future works, its playfulness with genre and format, and its near unparalleled use of music as a storytelling device, Alan Wake 2 is a game that you will not only want to play and replay, but also decrypt and unpack and consider and discuss. To this point, I have not yet discussed how Alan Wake plays as a video game, and there's a good reason for that. The combat stuff is easily the least impressive part of this package, not because it's bad, but rather because it's quite workmanlike when compared to the rest of what Alan Wake 2 has to offer. To be clear, combat is good, no two ways about it. The flow of shining a light on an enemy to break their darkness shield and then unloading on them works every time, assisted by the excellent sound design that kicks in every time you shine that torch. Also rather welcome is the whole weak spot thing. Sometimes when you pop a darkness shield, it will reveal an enemy's weak spot, hit that and it will deal devastating damage and dish out a very satisfying sound effect to boot. The weapons all feel nice to fire, again with great sound design, and made to feel more impactful by the way enemies respond to every bullet. However, that arsenal of weaponry is very limited, and enemy design in particular is very limited. I mean, there's really only 3 or 4 enemy types in the whole game, and they're all functionally similar, which is that they kind of teleport quickly to juke you, they swing at you to give you an opportunity to dodge, and that's about the limit of their kit. For Saga, she's never facing more than 2 or 3 foes at a time, indicating that Remedy kind of knew the limits of what they've built here and they didn't want to overdo it by throwing tons of enemies at you in a combat framework that really wasn't built for it. For Alan, it's a little different. He's typically harassed by these shadows that will slowly or quickly move toward him, menacingly whispering his name as they do so. Most of these will actually dissipate when they reach him, but some will throw him to the ground, while others will transform into actual foes who can be shot with your gun. It's a surprisingly compelling approach to survival horror enemies, since the intention is rarely to fight them, but rather to avoid them, but as you explore, you're forced to brush up against them, which creates these very tense moments when you're hoping that the shadow you're barreling towards doesn't turn out to be one of the bad ones. Tension is further elevated by the precisely tuned ammo, health, and battery economy. It's very stingy, you will feel every missed shot or failed dodge, but it isn't so tightly tuned that you're going to feel frustrated. In fact, on normal difficulty, I'd say the game is actually quite easy, and I only died a handful of times in my playthrough. Those looking for more of a challenge should definitely play on the harder difficulty the first time through. Boss encounters are, I think, a real standout. They're not incredible, but they're really great visual and thematic showcases that rely more on unique mechanics than simply shooting the boss a bunch of times until the kill's over. Again, I think Remedy knew the limits of the combat model they designed here, and they were keen to avoid mindless bullet sponge bosses. So all of this works, and it works really well, but where the reach and ambition of Alan Wake is like 18 out of 10 when it comes to storytelling, presentation, music, and sound, it's really only shooting for like a 6 or 7 out of 10 here when it comes to the combat. I think part of that is a response to Alan Wake 1, which was criticized for having too many pointless combat encounters and too many enemies all at once. I think it's partly a response to criticisms of Control, which was so thick with action that it would often suffocate the scenery or storytelling, plus the enemy counts and difficulty tuning at the back end of that game were truly awful. Finally, it's of course also a result of the shift away from action and towards survival horror, and the more classic survival horror, mind you, not the action survival horror of something like Resident Evil 4. That's probably a good touch point to finish on. Resident Evil 4's combat sandbox, enemy design, encounter design, and bosses were absolutely top tier, unparalleled in the genre, but they were ultimately the focus of the game. Alan Wake 2 has a different focus, and so while its combat is always good, it's unlikely to be the reason that you're going to love Alan Wake 2, which is kind of the same story from the first game. Again, not to dwell too much on that Resident Evil 4 comparison, but I think it's a fascinating companion piece to Alan Wake 2. They are, after all, both big-budget AAA survival horror games that released in 2023 to critical acclaim. Hell, they have almost identical scores on OpenCritic. What's fascinating is that these are 2 survival horror games of the highest quality that manage to showcase 2 totally different visions of what this genre can be. Resident Evil leaning hard into the conflict that occurs on the battlefield, while Alan Wake 2 explores a more internal, psychological form of warfare. Resident Evil 4 is big explosions and the handsome, buff Leon S. Kennedy roundhouse kicking zombie villagers by the dozen. Alan Wake 2 is a mother piecing together clues on an evidence board and a tweed jacket wearing dweeb looking confused and panicked for 20 hours straight. They are so different, but they are both extraordinary in their own way, and they're such a perfect pigeon pair because they actually bookend the year, Resident Evil 4 being the first Game of the Year hopeful to release in 2023, and Alan Wake 2 likely being the last. I was in LA for a hands-on preview event for Alan Wake 2 some months back, and during that they held a panel and Sam Lake was actually on there. One of the questions he got, and I forget what it was, but it led Sam to say something that really stuck with me. He said that he'd been trying to make Alan Wake 2 for 13 years, but he was really glad that he never got the chance to do so before this, because everything the studio went through in that time got them ready for this moment. I absolutely felt that when I played through Alan Wake 2. It had a vibrancy and an energy that felt like it had been cooped up for too long and was finally free. It felt like all the learnings from previous games were incorporated here. It felt like Remedy knew how to honor and acknowledge their rich legacy as a studio, while also bellowing out with this new clear voice that would carry them into their next 2, 3, or 4 games as they build out this connected world and continue to hone a storytelling style that no one in the industry can lay claim to. What a special game delivered at such a special moment for such a special studio. I absolutely love this. Alan Wake 2 is utterly captivating from the first moment to the last, and I strongly recommend it to you. Alrighty, so that's the review done. Now let's do a bit of a deep dive into some of the tech that powers this game's visuals thanks to this video's sponsor, Nvidia. So Alan Wake looks incredible, and a lot of its beauty lives in the subtle details. This isn't about big bombastic spectacle or giant open worlds, it's about dense foliage, the buzzing neon signage, your character's reflection in a pane of glass or in a rain puddle. That's what makes Alan Wake 2's visuals so immersive, and these specific things all benefit greatly from Nvidia's latest technological advancements, namely full ray tracing, supported by the all-new DLSS 3.5. So what is full ray tracing? Well, you probably already know about ray tracing at this point. It's a method of recreating light so that it reflects and fills more realistically. It's a technology that consumers have had access to for a while now, but recently Nvidia have brought it to a whole new level with full ray tracing, also known as path tracing. We saw it recently in Cyberpunk. Previous versions of ray tracing simulated light from a number of sources, but full ray tracing simulates light from all sources in a scene. It is the most accurate simulation of light we have ever seen in video games, and the results are truly transformative. It's here in Alan Wake 2. It absolutely gives you those reflections you think of when you think ray tracing, but it also fills scenes out more realistically. Remember that neon signage I mentioned earlier? Thanks to full ray tracing, that neon light spills more realistically. Volumetric fog soaks up more light, and more shadows are cast by more objects. Full ray tracing is less about what's shiny or reflective, and more about the subtle fill lighting that makes scenes feel more immersive and real. The thing is though, full ray tracing is very GPU intensive, hogging a lot of your GPU's total processing power, and that is where DLSS 3.5 comes in. You've probably heard of DLSS as well at this point. It's the undisputed best form of upscaling, rendering your game at a lower resolution and then using AI to rebuild that image so that it retains the same fidelity as higher resolutions. This provides a massive performance uplift, giving you the headroom to enable more demanding options like ray tracing. But it doesn't stop there. Last year, Nvidia pushed out DLSS 3, which uses AI to interlace additional frames in between those which were being natively rendered. Depending on the game, this tech allows you to more than double your frame rate, while Nvidia Reflex ensures that input latency is kept to an absolute minimum. In Alan Wake, for example, you can absolutely get over 100 FPS at 4K, everything set to max settings, full ray tracing enabled. If you want your games to feel smoother than ever before, then DLSS 3 can deliver that. But Nvidia had one final ace up their sleeve, and it's called DLSS 3.5, and it takes the already incredible results of DLSS and makes them even better. Again, not to get too technical, but DLSS ray reconstruction enhances image quality for all GeForce RTX GPUs by using AI to generate additional pixels for intensive ray trace scenes. To achieve this, the AI is trained on 5 times the amount of data compared to what it was trained on before, and this produces exceptional image clarity while also providing an additional performance uplift. Remember all that foliage I mentioned earlier? DLSS 3.5 removes the ghosting effect that was sometimes present in previous AI upscaling. Remember those rain puddles I mentioned earlier? DLSS 3.5 also tidies up the quality of reflected objects, meaning that the reflections look almost one-to-one with what they are reflecting, where previously that was a bit murkier. So that's the power of Nvidia's latest technology: better, clearer ray trace reflections, and better, more immersive fill lighting thanks to full ray tracing, better frame rates thanks to DLSS 3, and a better AI reconstructed image thanks to DLSS 3.5. And that's not even mentioning all of the other stuff that Nvidia RTX GPUs have to offer, like their raw processing power, their support for 120Hz TVs, their excellent driver and software support, and so much more. Nvidia RTX GPUs consistently deliver the absolute cutting edge of graphical fidelity, so if you want to experience the best that PC gaming has to offer, then be sure to check out Nvidia's website for more information. Link to that in the description below. Thanks Nvidia for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.